The intergalactic meeting chamber buzzed with a tense, unspoken energy. The neutral space station, floating in the void between galaxies, was a symbol of peace. Yet the atmosphere within the room felt anything but peaceful. The humans sat on one side of the massive, crescent-shaped table, their diplomat seated at the center. He was a man of poise, seasoned in the art of negotiation, but today even his calm demeanor was tested. Across from him sat the Venari, a race notorious for their secretive nature. They were elusive, known throughout the galaxy for their advanced technology and impenetrable physiology. The Venari representative, a tall, graceful beauty, radiated an aura of both intimidation and allure. Her silver skin shimmered under the station's artificial lighting, her eyes sharp, focused, betraying little emotion. Her movements were smooth, deliberate, calculated. This was not a being to be underestimated. Her posture alone made it clear she was in control. Yet something about her presence unnerved the humans, especially the diplomat, who couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The conversation began as expected, pleasantries exchanged between both parties, but the diplomat's mind was elsewhere. Rumors had already reached them, whispers of a strange, concealed ability the Venari possessed. Hidden between their legs, some said, was a biological advantage, perhaps a weapon, something terrifying in its potential. There was no clear proof, but in a galaxy where survival meant outthinking your enemies, such rumors could not be ignored. As the talks proceeded, the diplomat's attention shifted, his thoughts swirling. The Venari beauty had yet to mention the thing. It was almost as if the entire subject was deliberately avoided, left unspoken, dangling in the air like an unspoken threat. His colleagues exchanged uneasy glances, sensing his growing apprehension. He could feel the weight of their stares, waiting for him to address the issue. He had to know. If this ability was real, if it could endanger humanity, he had to understand it before it was too late. Then, as if reading his mind, the Venari ambassador made a cryptic reference. Her words were calm, laced with hidden meaning. Our differences run deep, and so do our abilities. Her gaze locked onto the human diplomats, and for a moment, everything around him seemed to slow. He could feel his heart rate rise, his chest tightening with the gravity of her words. It was time. He leaned forward, breaking the thin veil of politeness that had stretched across the table. Enough with the hints and half-truths. We've heard about your ability. It's time we understand what we're dealing with here. The room fell silent. The Venari delegation exchanged unreadable glances, their expressions as guarded as ever. The diplomat's pulse quickened. He had expected resistance, but this silence was worse. It was confirmation that something was being concealed. You wish to see it? The Venari beauty's voice was like a calm breeze before a storm, almost too casual for the gravity of the moment. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. You demand to know what this can do? Are you sure you're ready for the truth? The air thickened with tension. Both the human and Venari delegations sat in stunned silence, unsure of how to proceed. The diplomat's demand had cut through the delicate diplomatic dance like a blade. Cultural differences loomed large in the room, the Venari seeing his directness as a violation of some unspoken rule of respect. He could sense the mistrust deepening between them. In the silence, the diplomat's mind raced. What had he just set in motion? What kind of power were they about to witness? His imagination spun in overdrive, drawing on the worst possibilities. Could it be a biological weapon? Something capable of wiping out entire civilizations? Could it be technology beyond anything humanity had ever encountered? He steeled himself, mentally preparing for the worst-case scenario. But the Venari beauty remained poised, seemingly unaffected by the tension. She didn't flinch, didn't break her gaze. Her calm was unnerving, her confidence absolute. The weight of her next words hung heavily in the air. You humans, always so eager to see what you don't understand. She mused, almost mockingly. Very well, if you insist. But I warn you, once you see it, there will be no going back. A cold chill ran down the diplomat's spine. Her words weren't a threat, but they carried a weight that shook him. What could be so powerful, so transformative, that it would change everything? He couldn't back down now. He had made the demand in front of both delegations. He had to follow through. The Venari delegation shifted slightly, their eyes on their representative, as if waiting for her next move. She rose slowly from her seat, every movement precise, her presence commanding the attention of the entire room. No one dared breathe too loudly, no one moved. All eyes were on her. The diplomat's heart pounded in his chest as she walked around the table, stopping just in front of him. Her gaze met his, unblinking, challenging. "You want to see what this can do?" Her voice was a low whisper, carrying a weight far beyond its volume. "Be careful what you wish for." In that moment, the diplomat realized that he had just crossed into unknown territory, and whatever came next, there would be no turning back. The diplomat's heart raced, pounding so hard in his chest that he was sure everyone in the room could hear it. His mind swirled with a storm of worst-case scenarios. Could the Venari have mastered biological warfare in a way that no one else in the galaxy had? Were they hiding some unfathomable technological superiority beneath their calm, silver exterior? The rumors had been chilling enough, but now, faced with the reality of this moment, he found himself lost in a flood of possibilities, none of them good. He glanced around the room, seeing his colleagues stiffen in their seats. The Venari beauty, standing so confidently in front of him, showed no signs of fear or hesitation. Her calm composure made the rising tension all the more unbearable. The weight of her words echoed in his mind, asterisk. "Once you see it, there will be no going back." Asterisk, what did that mean? What could be so devastating, so irreversible? His throat tightened, dry with anxiety, as she took a step forward. Every move she made was deliberate, purposeful. He had demanded to know the truth, and now there was no escape. The Venari ambassador glanced back at her delegation briefly, as if seeking their silent approval, before returning her gaze to the human diplomat. Her voice, low and measured, cut through the suffocating silence. "You are not ready to understand the full implications," she said softly, but there was no doubt in her tone. "You ask for this without knowing what you truly seek." A murmur rippled through the human side of the room, nervous whispers of uncertainty and fear. The diplomat fought to keep his expression neutral, but inside, his anxiety threatened to break free. His pulse quickened with each passing second. This moment, this reveal, could change everything. The Venari beauty's hands moved slowly, reaching toward the device nestled between her legs. A collective breath was held, the tension so thick it felt as if time itself had slowed. Eyes locked onto her every motion, anticipating something, anything, to explain what this thing could be. Could it unleash a deadly energy? Was it some weaponized form of Venari biology? With a slight twist of her hand, the device came to life. But what followed wasn't at all what the diplomat, or anyone, had expected. A soft hum filled the room, gentle at first, before building into a low, resonant frequency. Then, in a flash, an explosion of light erupted from the device, spilling into the air before them. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't destruction or chaos. Instead, it was a breathtaking display of shimmering colors and radiant patterns. Holographic shapes danced through the air, swirling and shifting, creating a symphony of lights that bathed the entire chamber in their glow. The diplomat blinked in shock. This was not what he had prepared for. The Venari beauty stood calmly, watching as the display unfolded. The holographic shapes twisted and morphed, blending colors with such fluidity that they seemed alive, as though each shift in hue carried its own meaning. And then, there were sounds soft, melodic, otherworldly. The diplomat strained to grasp the tones, realizing that they weren't just sounds, but emotions, Venari emotions. Feelings that transcended words, that bypassed language entirely and reached straight into the heart. Moments of Venari history played out in the air before them. Entire civilizations, long past, were woven into the fabric of the display. Their rise, their triumphs, their sorrow. The sheer depth of it left the human diplomat speechless. It was as if he had been transported into another world, one where beauty and pain coexisted in perfect harmony. He tried to make sense of it, tried to reconcile the fear and suspicion he'd felt with the awe that now overtook him. The thing was not a weapon, not even close. It was art. Pure, unfiltered art that conveyed more in a single moment than any language ever could. It captured the very essence of what it meant to be Venari, something beyond human comprehension until now. The room was utterly silent, save for the gentle hum of the display. No one dared speak. No one moved. The diplomat, his heart still hammering, found his earlier thoughts slipping away, replaced by something entirely different. Wonder. Amazement. He had come here expecting a confrontation, preparing for the worst, only to find himself faced with something far more powerful, an expression of life and culture that he had never known possible. The Venari beauty watched his reaction carefully. For the first time, a faint smile touched her lips. "This," she said softly, "is our weapon." The diplomat's brow furrowed. He didn't understand at first. How could something so beautiful, so moving, be a weapon? But then, as the display continued, he began to grasp its true significance. This was not a weapon in the physical sense. It was a weapon of emotion, of understanding. It was a means to bridge the gap between species, to communicate in a way that transcended fear and hostility. In that moment, everything shifted. He looked at her, his mind reeling. All the suspicion, all the paranoia that had driven him to demand the reveal, now seemed absurd. He had been so blinded by the idea of superiority, by the need to protect his species from perceived threats, that he had failed to see the potential for something far greater: connection. This is your ability?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Art? Not just art," she corrected gently. "It is our soul. Our history. Our deepest truths." Her eyes softened, her tone growing more sincere. "What you feared as a weapon is our greatest form of expression. It allows us to speak without words, to feel without misunderstanding. It is who we are." The diplomat stood there, awestruck. He had been wrong. So wrong. What he had feared was not a weapon of destruction, but one of creation. The Venari's ability to evoke such profound emotion, to share their essence so freely, it was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. As the display faded, the diplomat felt a wave of clarity wash over him. His assumptions had been shattered, replaced by a new understanding of the Venari. They were not just another enigmatic species. They were artists, creators, and visionaries. In that moment, he realized that this thing had the power to unite them, not through fear or dominance, but through shared understanding. And for the first time, he saw a future not of conflict, but of collaboration, built on the foundation of something far more powerful than any weapon: empathy. The diplomat took a deep breath, his entire perspective shifting. The negotiations were no longer about protecting humanity from an unknown threat. They were about forging a bridge between two species, each with their own strengths, but with the potential to grow together. The human diplomat, still reeling from the emotional power of the Venari display, felt a deep need to understand more. He turned to the alien beauty, the one who had so calmly revealed what had initially seemed like an existential threat, but had now blossomed into something far more profound. "What you showed us, it's remarkable," he said softly, trying to find the right words to convey the weight of his thoughts. "But why art? Why is this the way your people choose to communicate such deep truths?" The alien beauty's gaze softened as she considered his question. "Our species," she began, her voice flowing like liquid silver, "believes that language, while useful, is limited. Words can be manipulated, misunderstood. Art, true art, transcends those limitations. It carries the essence of emotion, of history, of being, in a way that cannot be corrupted. It speaks directly to the heart, bypassing the mind's tendency to dissect and overanalyze." The diplomat nodded, understanding the wisdom behind her words. He could feel the sincerity in them, the weight of a millennia-old practice that had shaped the Venari culture in ways he had never imagined. "We have art too," he said, his voice more contemplative. "It's different from yours, I suppose, but it serves a similar purpose. Music, painting, dance, These things allow us to express what words cannot. When you sang your history into the air, I felt something. He struggled for the right term, then added, a connection. The alien beauty smiled slightly, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. We are not so different then, she said. But I imagine your forms of expression are unique to your people. Show me, human. Show me how your kind expresses its soul. The diplomat blinked in surprise at the invitation. He hadn't expected the Venari to show such curiosity, but the sincerity in her tone left him no choice but to respond in kind. Pulling up his personal device, he quickly navigated to a file he kept for moments like these, a piece of classical music, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. As the soft, melancholic notes began to fill the room, the alien beauty tilted her head, listening intently. Her silver eyes glimmered with curiosity, but as the music unfolded, they softened. The melody, delicate yet profound, seemed to resonate within her. She remained silent throughout, allowing the sounds to wash over her, immersing herself in a language foreign yet somehow familiar. This, the diplomat said quietly, is one of our greatest composers. He captured emotions, love, loss, hope, through sound. No words, just feeling. The alien beauty closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the music. When the piece ended, she let the silence hang between them for a beat longer. It is different from ours, she admitted, but I can feel its intent. It carries an essence of sorrow, yet there is beauty in it. This is your way of conveying what lies beneath the surface. He nodded. It's just one way. There are countless others. Each culture, each people on our planet, has their own forms of art. Music, dance, painting, storytelling, they're how we communicate with each other, how we make sense of our world. The alien beauty's expression shifted, her gaze softening as though she was seeing him, and humans, for the first time. And here we thought you were only focused on technology, conquest, survival. I had not expected this. I underestimated your people. The diplomat chuckled. You wouldn't be the first to make that mistake. We're more than we appear to be. A newfound sense of mutual respect blossomed between them. The Venari's initial intimidation, rooted in mystery and secrecy, began to fade as they saw humanity's capacity for beauty and emotion. Likewise, the humans' initial suspicion of the Venari as a threat slowly dissolved in the face of their complex and rich artistic heritage. As they continued their conversation, sharing stories about their respective worlds, the tension between their two delegations dissipated. The Venari began to ask questions, not about human military might or political ambitions, but about their art, their music, their forms of expression. They were fascinated by humanity's way of capturing emotions in so many different mediums. The diplomat, in turn, asked more about the Venari's artistic tool. He learned that it was not just a cultural artifact, but a deeply spiritual one. We have no singular leader, the alien beauty explained. Our artists guide us. They shape the way we see the universe. Each Venari is connected to our history through these performances. Our emotions, our memories are preserved in the art. The diplomat found himself entranced by the depth of their traditions. I never would have imagined, he admitted. What we thought was a weapon, it's something far greater. I see that now. The alien beauty gave him a knowing look. Fear often clouds our ability to see the truth. We are guilty of it as well. When we first encountered your people, we assumed you were crude, driven by your basest instincts. But now, she trailed off, her eyes flickering over the human diplomat. Now I see the depth in you. You are not what we feared. The realization hit both of them in that moment. This exchange, this connection, had shifted the dynamic between their species. The fear of the unknown, the mistrust that had once loomed so large between them, had been replaced by something far more powerful: understanding. For the first time since the negotiations had begun, the human diplomat felt hope. Hope that this meeting was more than just a political maneuver or a bid for power. It was the start of something new. An opportunity to learn from one another, to grow together. As the conversation continued, the alien beauty revealed more of her personal story. She spoke of the Venari's long history of isolation, their reluctance to engage with other species for fear of losing their cultural identity. But perhaps, she mused, we have been too protective. There is value in sharing, in opening ourselves up to others. The diplomat smiled. Maybe. And maybe we've been too quick to see threats where there are none. I think this is the start of something important. She met his gaze, her expression thoughtful. I agree. Art, culture, they are more powerful than any weapon. They have the power to unite us. In that moment, they both understood that this wasn't just the end of a negotiation, it was the beginning of a new era. An era where their two species, once suspicious and wary of each other, could come together through their shared appreciation for art and creativity. It was the bridge they needed, the common ground that would allow them to move forward. They made a quiet promise to each other. This cultural exchange would continue. They would learn from one another, explore the depths of each other's artistic traditions, and find unity through their differences. As the diplomat left the chamber that day, he carried with him a renewed sense of purpose. This was no longer about survival or dominance. It was about connection, something far more valuable than any negotiation could offer. The shift in the room was palpable. Where tension had once been thick enough to choke the air, there now lingered a sense of calm, of understanding. Both the human and Venari delegations sat more relaxed, their previous wariness dissolving in the wake of the unexpected revelation. The human diplomat could sense it. The room felt different, lighter. This wasn't just a shift in atmosphere, it was a shift in purpose. The alien beauty, no longer a symbol of the unknown threat, had become something else entirely, a representative of a culture rich in peace, in creativity. Her presence, once intimidating, now exuded a sense of quiet pride, an understanding that both species had much to offer one another. The humans no longer viewed her with suspicion, and she, in turn, no longer saw them as simple, war-driven creatures. The human diplomat took a deep breath and spoke, his voice steady but warm. We have spent enough time focusing on our differences, he said, casting a glance around the table at both delegations. I believe it's time we start building on what we've learned from each other. There is much potential for growth between our two species, not just in the realms of politics or technology, but in culture. We can learn from each other's art, music, history. I propose we begin this collaboration with an exchange of what makes us who we are. The Venari leader, who had remained quiet throughout much of the proceedings, finally nodded, his expression contemplative. We agree. What was revealed today has shown us the true strength of your people. You may not possess the same technologies, but your culture, your creativity, these are strengths we had not anticipated. The human diplomat smiled, appreciating the weight of those words. And you've shown us a depth we didn't expect either. I think we can both agree that there is more value in understanding one another than in fearing what we don't know. It was a simple statement, but it carried the heart of the new relationship that was forming. Both species, once perched on the edge of conflict, were now exploring the vast potential of their mutual respect. As the conversation continued, the focus shifted from strategies of war and defense to possibilities for the future. The human diplomat suggested joint projects, starting with artistic collaborations between the two cultures. We could begin with shared exhibitions, your art, our music. A fusion of Venari and human expression, something neither of our species has seen before. There was genuine interest in the room now, a spark of curiosity that hadn't existed before. The Venari leader turned to the alien beauty, and she nodded, her agreement clear. We welcome this. The Venari have always believed in the power of art to unite, to transcend boundaries. We did not know you felt the same. Then it's settled, the diplomat said, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. The road to peace had been longer than anyone anticipated, but they had arrived at a crossroads. Now they stood on the brink of something far more significant than any treaty, a cultural partnership that would not only solidify peace but inspire both species to see each other in a new light. The room came alive with agreements and discussions of future plans, but there was no mistaking the shift. The negotiations had succeeded not because of political maneuvering or military might, but because they had discovered a shared language, one rooted in creativity and expression. That evening, the two delegations gathered for a celebration. It was modest by human standards, but the shared joy was undeniable. Tables filled with food from both worlds and music, human and Venari, played in the background. It was the first time both species had come together not as potential enemies, but as partners. The human diplomat found himself standing beside the alien beauty as the sounds of laughter and conversation filled the air. "I never imagined it would turn out like this," he admitted, his tone light yet sincere. "Neither did I," she replied, a hint of amusement in her voice. "But sometimes, the unexpected brings the greatest rewards." They watched as members of both delegations began to mix, to exchange stories and ideas, laughter ringing out in the distance. It was a scene neither of them would have thought possible just days ago, and yet here they were, witnessing it. "I think this is the start of something truly significant," the diplomat said, glancing at her. "Not just for our species, but for others who might follow in our footsteps." She nodded. "The Venari have always believed in the power of art to bridge divides. It seems humans believe that too. This is just the beginning." There was a shared sense of camaraderie now, something that went beyond the formalities of diplomacy. It felt real, tangible. The two species had forged a connection that transcended politics, one that would endure. As the celebration continued, the human diplomat found himself reflecting on how close they had come to disaster. Just days ago, the threat of war had loomed large. The misunderstanding, the fear of the unknown, had nearly driven them to conflict. And yet it had been art, the very essence of their cultures, that had saved them. He looked at the alien beauty once more, the memory of that first tense meeting fresh in his mind. How different things could have been, he thought. How easy it would have been for fear to destroy what they now had. But they had overcome it. They had chosen a different path, one of unity and understanding. And now, standing here in the midst of celebration, he felt an overwhelming sense of hope. As the evening drew to a close, the delegations made plans for the future, joint projects, cultural exchanges, and new avenues of cooperation that had never before been considered. The peace treaty was signed not just with ink but with the promise of a lasting relationship, built on the foundations of mutual respect and the shared love of artistic expression. Before they parted, the human diplomat turned to the alien beauty one last time. "Thank you," he said simply. "For everything." She inclined her head, her expression warm. "No, thank you. For showing us that we were wrong." They exchanged one last smile before heading their separate ways, both knowing that this was far from the end. It was the beginning of a new era, one where two very different species had found common ground, not through power or fear, but through art and understanding. As the diplomat left the chamber, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They had avoided war, they had built a bridge, and now, for the first time, they were looking toward a future not clouded by suspicion, but illuminated by the light of creativity. Despite the vastness of space and the differences that still existed between them, one thing had become clear: they were not so different after all. And in that realization there was hope for the future, hope that misunderstanding would be replaced by respect, and that fear would give way to unity.